Welcome back to Tales from the Enchanted Forest podcast with your hosts, Fox and Sparrow.
Hola! How's everyone doing? I say that, but it's just us. How are you doing, Fox?
How's everyone doing? But really, you only want to hear about me. I'm doing good. It's been sunny, but really cold. You know, we have to talk about the weather first.
For the record, I do want to know how the audience is doing and how the travelers are doing, but they don't really seem to be responding to me on these conversations. I talk to them and it's just crickets, so I just need to know your updates.
Well, I decided, because we're all in that weird spot where it's cold in some places, warm in other places, cold in the morning, hot in the afternoon. We're in this weird place that today we should travel all the way to Iceland for our story.
Ooh, that sounds fun.
Well, you know us. We love a good Scandinavian tale.
I was just going to say, there's a lot of good stories out there, but, whenever we go to, Iceland and, these kind of more northern countries, they just get so weird, and I just love them so much.
Yes, I mean, Scandinavia has not much else to do besides the sauna, skiing, probably hunting. I don't know enough about Scandinavia. But mainly, this was inspired by the Eurovision. So, I've been thinking a lot about Eurovision. It's next month, but not this month. But partly why I chose a Scandinavian tale is because I am obsessed with the Swedish entry. So, we watched Melody Festival, which is the basically, it's like Sweden's version of Eurovision, where they have all of their contestants go through rounds and rounds of, voting and stuff to see who is going to go represent Sweden in the actual Eurovision contest in May. And so when we were watching it, there was a band that sung about being in the sauna, and I thought they were fantastic. I know we talked about Eurovision last year, and my favorite contestants are always the ones that go right into the folk music. They sing in their own language. They do something wild. They do something crazy. Mm-hmm. Don't get me wrong. We all love a good ballad or a pop number, but the ones that are the most fun to watch are always the ones that really, really go traditional, but with a modern twist. And so Sweden, which, ironically, the actual band I think is from Finland or Norway, but they did a really, really good song about the sauna. And I was looking at Scandinavian tales, and I came across this one from Iceland. And it has the same kind of vibe, to be honest, of weird and wacky. Specifically because it's the stories of, and I'm going to say this wrong because I looked up the pronunciation and my mouth just does not make those sounds. Saemunder the Wise. Now, unlike Hogwarts or other witching schools, he attended the University of Black Magic, led by the devil himself. Oh. This makes him quite an intriguing folk hero because he was a priest who learned directly from the devil, which is a little bit more interesting than being a typical knight or wandering magician like Merlin. He was also based on a real man who lived in southern Iceland, and while none of the real Sæmunder's work survived, he is repeatedly mentioned in other sagas, and his work is often mentioned and quoted, so he was obviously a significant figure in Icelandic and Scandinavian myth-making.
When you talked about, him going to a University of Black Magic, that did make me think, a couple episodes ago when we covered the Snow Queen, how the opening, one of the opening things was there was that, devil that had his own school, his devil school, and now I'm just it's all connected, this is the school they were talking about. So this is now just these stories must be connected to the Snow Queen, is what I'm saying.
The Devil's University is in France.
Yes.
Who knew? So today we do have 3 stories from Scandinavian Folktales, edited and translated by Jacqueline Simpson. Her book addresses the oral narratives, commonly referred to as legends in English, and she defines these Scandinavian legends as primarily rooted in the social beliefs and assumptions of both the storyteller and the listener. Moreover, these legends often have coherent plots and recognizable structures and patterns that storytellers have employed for generations. There's an entire section of her book that's dedicated to master magicians and witches, so it's not just restricted to Saemunder the Wise. There are also priests and other seers and reverends that play prominent roles in Scandinavian folktales. However, today we are just focused on the one true wacky wizard of the North. Our first story is Saemund at the Black School. Saemund the Wise traveled abroad and went to the Black School, and there he learned strange arts. There was no schoolmaster to be seen in the Black School, but whatever the students might say one evening they wished to learn about, books about it would be provided next morning, or else it might be written up on the walls. Over the doorway on the inner side was written, "You may come in, your soul is lost." There was a rule in that school that anyone who came must study there for at least 3 years. All those who were leaving in any 1 year must all leave the place together, and the devil would always keep the one who went out last. So they always used to draw lots to see who would be the last out. More than once, the lot fell on Saemund, and so he remained there longer than the rules laid down. It so happened that Bishop John was visiting Rome and passed near this place. He learned that Saemund was still at the Black School for the reason that we just said. So he went in and spoke to the boy and offered to help him get away, provided he would go home to Iceland and live a life as a good Christian. And Saemund agreed. Bishop John made him walk out ahead of him, and he himself wore his cloak loose round his shoulders. And just as John was going out, a hand came up through the door and grabbed the cloak and dragged it down, but John got away. Others say this is how Saemund escaped. His fellow students arranged with him that he would go out last, and so he got a sheep's leg stitched to the bottom of his cloak, and as he followed the group who were rushing out through the school doors, something gripped at his cloak and caught the sheep leg. Then Saemund let the whole thing drop and took to his heels, saying, "He gripped, but away I slipped," and so rejoined his comrades. So it's important to note that while some versions of the school, the escape from the Black School, Saemund is considered to have done all of this by himself, so the second story with the sheep's leg, whereas in other stories, people think that the introduction of Bishop John was a canonized version of the story. And of course, I think we've talked about canonization before, and we've talked about Irish stories. Some of them include saints now, so that is supposed to get rid of some of the pagan figures that they might have replaced.
Always fun. I sift through what was original, what has been changed since other people showed up to read these stories.
The second story is called The Magic Whistle. Saemund the Wise owned a whistle, and the power of it was such that as soon as one blew it, one or more imps would come to whoever had blown it and ask what work they were to do. One day, he had left this whistle in his bed under his pillow, where he always used to keep it at night. That evening, he told the servant girl to get things ready for him as usual, but he warned her that if she found anything unusual in the bed, she must not touch it and just leave it where it was. Now, the girl went to go get things ready, and when she saw the whistle, she was more than a little curious. She picked it up eagerly, examined it all around and about, and finally she blew it. Which, gross.
Yeah.
Immediately, an imp appeared before her and asked, "What work must I do?" The girl was startled, but she did not let it show. It just so happened that 10 of the wizard's sheep had been slaughtered that day, and their fleeces were all laying outside. So the girl told the imp that he must count all the hairs on all the fleeces, and if he can do it faster than she can make the bed, then he can have her. Which is, again, quite a weird thing to ask.
Yeah, it's super weird.
The imp rushed off and strained every nerve to count all the hairs, while the girl hurried to make the bed. By the time she had finished, the imp still had one shank to count, and so he lost his bargain. Afterwards, Saemund asked the girl if she had found anything in the bed, and she told him the whole story. Just as it happened, and Saemund was pleased with her presence of mind. And again, another note, so another title of this story is also called Inexperienced Use of the Magic Book, and instead of a whistle, the girl or the servant opens up his book of spells and summons an imp that way. And finally, we have the story of Saemund on his deathbed.
Oh no.
And of course, there are lots and lots of stories based on these folk heroes and these folk figures. So these are just 3 that I happen to find in the book. But obviously there are more, and there are lots and lots of different versions of them, as I've pointed out, that, the book and the whistle, or the sheep leg versus the bishop. So it's always nice to see that there's lots of different versions to find.
Yeah, like reoccurring characters like this are fun because they're, like on some level they're probably just reoccurring tropes and they're like, well, it's just the same character. But I think there's just that fun want and desire by people to be like, what if it's all connected? Like, let's have it be like kind of meaningful. It's like one character doing all this incredible stuff. And I think it's just really fun to try and see those connections. So I love that like there's a lot of fun stories here with this character and that we're just getting a sampling of them.
Yeah, and I feel like we've talked about certain folk heroes before. Like we've talked about or at least recurring characters. So we've talked about Mullah Nasruddin, and he was a big folk hero or folk figure that appears in lots of small stories, usually with some kind of moral or some kind of gimmick to them. But we've also have Vasilisa, and she tends to be kind of a standard figure of what a heroine should look like in Russian folk tales. We often have trickster characters that are recurring characters, like Reynard the Fox. We have the Jackal in the South African folktales that we told earlier in the podcast history. So lots and lots of recurring figures do tend to come up. And I think having this wizard, this priest wizard, be one is really interesting because there's lots of opportunity to talk about magic and goodness and moral stories, but also have more legends and even like some explanatory tales, whatever the story calls for. And of course, if we're thinking about oral storytelling, having recognizable figures is just as important as having a recognizable pattern, right? So the storytellers can pull upon the qualities that a stock figure already has and uses them in his story or her story.
Yeah, exactly.
Saemund had taken in a poor man's child to be his foster daughter. He thought that some evil fate hung over her, and he loved her so much that he always kept his eyes on her and would not be parted from her. When he lay on his deathbed, he made her put her couch at the foot of his bed, for it seemed he trusted her to be the witness for his death. When he lay sick, he guessed that this would be his last illness, and as time wore on, she observed that he was anxious whether after his death he would go home to heaven or to the other place. On the evening before his death, he told his foster daughter to be on her guard that night, and to be sure not to fall asleep, for he said he had a feeling he would die that night, and if so, one might see some tokens to show what would become of him in the next world. So he bade her keep awake and take good note of everything, so that she would be able to tell his kinsman with full proofs what fitting place he went to. After this, he ceased speaking and lay back, but the girl loyally kept watch. When much of the night had passed, she saw that the room where they were was filling with demon imps, and it seemed to her that by their words they were trying to coax Saemund into some evil, but from his words and looks she judged that he would have nothing to do with them. As soon as the imps had failed in this, they tried to threaten him into doing evil, but he bravely resisted their threats, just as he had their coaxings. After this, the imps vanished, but the room was filled again with mosquitoes, which attacked the body. His strength was failing by then, so he could not defend himself or brush the mosquitoes off. But just when their biting was tormenting him most fiercely, the girl noticed a ray of light glide up from his mouth. She realized it must have been his soul gliding up to the blessed home. And indeed, all the mosquitoes vanished, and Saemund passed away. So before you're allowed to go anywhere into the afterlife, you have to fight mosquitoes, which I'm not sure I could take.
Honestly, that seems pretty torturous, and I'm like not surprised at all. Like the imps and these like, psh, whatever, I can withstand you. But then the moment mosquitoes come out, it's like I'm done. I need to leave this mortal coil.
Like I can't. You can take me wherever you want.
Gosh, they're the worst part of summer, 100%.
I mean, there are more stories, obviously, and one of them is that after Saemund had tricked the devil by giving him the sheep's leg and not letting him keep him at the Black University, that the devil just followed him around constantly.
Okay. He was not just trying to get his tuition fees or like his student loans paid.
This is Jake from State Farm, but it says the devil from the Black University.
I mean, honestly, all that Black University stuff just seemed to check out. I'm like, yeah, they kind of keep forcing you to stay and they keep making you pay stuff. It's like, yeah, that's university.
Well, apparently at one point he did turn the devil, like when he was heading back to Iceland from the university and the devil was following him, he brought either a spell book or a holy book or something of that nature. He brought it down on the devil's head. And then he swam to Iceland.
Honestly, that is maybe the most impressive thing. Not the magic, just him swimming all the way to Iceland.
I can't remember the exact story, but I think it was something like he asked the devil for help to get to Iceland. The devil was like, great, but you're going to give me your soul afterwards, right? And Saemund was like, yeah, sure, okay. But in return, you have to make it so my feet won't get wet or something like that. And then I think he walked across a bit. And then when the devil went to go take his soul or something, he brought the spell book or the holy book down on his head and then swam the rest of the way. But lots of just interesting random bits and bobs. And I think it's an interesting mix of some Christian elements, some, like black magic and obviously spell books and stuff like that, and imps, some magical creatures. So it's like a mix of what the storytelling would have looked like, probably when it was first told, or the iterations of it when it was in the early stages, versus what's happened to it since canonization, and how some of the stories have taken into the Christian themes that are more prominent.
Yeah. No, I think that's it's really interesting to see that, and it just seems like honestly, when we were just describing it right there, I'm like, this just seems like a background for like a D&D character adventure where you're like, what's our first quest? Well, this crazy guy did these crazy things. We need you to go like find him and stuff. So I'm just kind of seeing like where a lot of inspirations are coming from in like other stories and stuff right now. And I think it's really cool kind of how it all just kind of comes together. And it's a fun, like you said, it's a fun mixture of like, you got like the religious kind of beliefs in there, but you also have like the black magic, the arcana and stuff like that. It's just a fun mix and a vibe, and I would love to hear more of these stories in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they're really interesting. I wish that there was more information about him as an actual author. But it's kind of like the Homer situation where it could have been one person. So it could have been the historic figure. And obviously the historic figure, Saemunder, he had written some books, and obviously his work was mentioned in lots of other works. But a lot of his specific, like his scholarship has been lost. Because I know he wrote a history on Norwegian kings, and people think that maybe he wrote the poetic Edda. But again, stuff like that, because it's so long ago, it's really hard to know what inspired the folk hero, if it was actually the person, if it was someone else that just didn't make it into history. So it's always interesting to see where these legends and folk tales come from.
I feel like the more we do this podcast and the more we kind of cover stories, the more I'm like, if I ever had a time machine, like there's no longer a list of things I want to go back and do and ask people, being like, what were you thinking? Who are you?
It's like, hi, just checking to make sure that you are actually the author of this work. Did you know that we still tell folktales about you in 2025?
Yeah, I know that seems like a made-up year, but it's true now. Tell me your secrets.
It's like, so I know it's 10:56 now, but
can you also be a guest to my podcast?
And can you tell us how you made the devil turn himself into a seal? We'd love to know.
Yes, we want the details, please and thank you. My goodness, that would be so fun.
So those are the 3 stories from Icelandic folklore. And of course, as always, disclaimers. There are different versions of all of these tales. There are different versions of this actual folktale character. So if you have a different version, or if you're familiar with a different version, then keep in mind that that work is also just as valid as the stories we've told today. Not just as valid. What word am I looking for?
Just relevant?
Yeah, so just keep in mind that all those different versions make up the actual folklore and history around this character. whose name I'm going to butcher for one last time, Saemund. See, in my head, I can hear my Swedish friends pronouncing it, like Saemund or something like that, and I'm like, I can hear it in my head. But when I try and say it, it comes out wrong. So I'm like, I think I'll just use the butchered version so that I don't insult anyone with my faux Swedish Scandinavian accent.
No, it's fair. We appreciate the try. We know that words are hard and it's hard to pronounce.
Yes, we do spend
names.
A considerable amount of the podcast Googling how to pronounce
things, and we just cross our fingers and hope for the best.
Yes.
But thank you, dear travelers, for tuning in and sticking with us even as we've bumble through some of these names and words.
And as always, travelers, if you want to see more, such as the show summary or notes, then please do check out the website, www.talesfromenchantforest.com. If you do want to hear from us, we are active on Bluesky, Mastodon, and most other social media sites under the name @FromEnchanted or just under the podcast name. However, if you are old school like Sparrow, then you can email us at talesfromenchantforest@gmail.com. We'd love to hear your comments, questions, and suggestions as we plan our episodes out for the rest of 2025.
And remember, there's always a place for you in the Enchanted Forest.